Welcome to Lesson 1 of Mesopotamia, Mesopotamian Geography. So we're going to take a look at the world map, and you'll see here that the area that we refer to as the Middle East is this area between Africa, Europe, and Asia. If we zoom in on the Middle East, you'll see that this part makes up the Middle East, so this outer circle right here makes up what we call the Middle East, and these countries that are colored in are what make up the Middle East. And Mesopotamia is what we call current-day Iraq. Now, Mesopotamia, you have to remember, is an ancient civilization, so it is not something that is still here today. Physically, it is still here, but it is no longer called Mesopotamia. So the area of the world that we're talking about is currently Iraq. Looking more closely at it, Mesopotamia is this area between the two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and it is in this really green area of the map. We're going to talk about this a little more as the lesson goes on. However, I just wanted to give you a look at where Mesopotamia is specifically, so that way when I tell you what Mesopotamia means, it'll make sense. All right, so currently, Mesopotamia is what we know as Iraq. And like we said before, Mesopotamia is between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, and it literally means the land between two rivers. Now, the confusing part is you'll hear a lot of people talk about the Fertile Crescent, which is the land between the Mediterranean Sea, the Persian Gulf, Taurus Mountains, and the Zagros Mountains. It includes parts of Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel. Now, the Fertile Crescent is a very large area. Mesopotamia is a small part of the Fertile Crescent. So the Fertile Crescent is all this that you see in red, okay, in the background of the map. And Mesopotamia is right in here. So this land between the two rivers in here. Again, Mesopotamia is the land between the rivers, and it is between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Now, when we talk about the geography of a civilization, geography is actually very important because the geography determines whether or not you're going to be able to survive in that area. If you look at somebody who goes out into the desert and has nothing, if they have no water, no food, no shelter, they are not going to survive. So where the Mesopotamian civilization started is very important because if they weren't by water, and they're between the two rivers, you'll notice, they would not be able to survive. However, because it is such a dry, sandy climate, how did they produce food? How did they make enough food for them to survive? There's a lot of interesting facts when it comes to Mesopotamia. So right now we're just going to dive into the geography. And then from there, we're going to talk about how the geography impacted their technology and their culture, their accomplishments, a lot of different things. So Mesopotamia, when we talk about its makeup, has a very hot climate. It has a very hot climate, it has dry soil, and very unpredictable rivers. It also has very few natural resources. So just looking at it, Mesopotamia does not look like a convenient place to start a civilization. However, the first civilization did start here. So we're going to talk about how and why as we go on. Okay. Farming, however, made settlement in this area possible. Now, there had to have been a way, and think about what Fertile Crescent means, and there had to have been a way for them to be able to farm. So when working with the water, because there were the two major rivers surrounding Mesopotamia, first you need to know what a tributary is. Okay, a tributary is a branch of a river. So when you see a river, typically you don't just see a river that goes like this and that's it. You'll see a river and then it'll have smaller waterways that'll branch off from it. Okay, and these smaller waterways are called tributaries. Okay, because the water from this contributes to the river, or vice versa, the water from the river contributes to these smaller rivers. All right, the Euphrates River was a slow winding river, so it didn't have a very fast current. It was very slow. It had very few tributaries, and it's 1,250 miles long. So what this means to me, and what we're going to work on with inferencing for all of you, is that because the Euphrates River didn't have a lot of tributaries, there probably weren't a lot of civilizations that developed around that particular river. Okay, if there's more, the more tributaries they have, the more likely you're going to be able to start start making a home around this area, because you'll find that sometimes rivers aren't the nicest places to live by. Now, the Tigris was a fast-moving river. It's 1,720 miles long and had many tributaries. So I can infer that more city-states developed along the Tigris River because of the fact that there were more tributaries and more areas to uh, stake your claim and have a plot of land. All right, so continuing with the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates are often flooded Mesopotamia, and the flooding was very unpredictable. So yes, you need water to survive. However, these rivers continued to flood every year, and when they would flood, they would take out homes, they would take out crops, people. It made it very difficult to live right on the river. So even though the river provided what people needed to survive, it also took away life. Silt, which is a rich mixture of bits of rock and soil, were left behind after the flooding. This silt made the ground fertile and made it possible to grow crops on it. So now you have an even more difficult problem because the flooding caused the soil to be fertile and for people to be able to farm, but then you didn't know when the flooding was going to occur. So when you're growing your crops and now all of a sudden the flood comes, all of your crops are gone, you again have no food, no shelter, and you're back to square one of being homeless. Right? So even though there were a lot of floods, Mesopotamia had a lot of droughts. Droughts are long periods with little to no rain. So the fertile soil only came from the rivers, and no rain came to allow the ground to be saturated with water and to help those crops grow. So even though the river took away life, they really depended on it in order to survive. Right, the crops that they grew in Mesopotamia were barley, wheat, emmer, vegetables, and fruits. The animals they had were goats, sheep, cattle, horses, camels, and donkeys. So you have to remember that at one point, animals all ran free. They didn't have farms to live on. So once people started establishing homes and civilizations, they started to do the same with animals. So whereas before animals were running free, now farmers were trying to make it easier for them to grow and produce food, so they'd want to keep the animals near them so they didn't have to go hunting all the time. So now they started to make their homes for all of these animals. All right, so that's all we're going to talk about for day one, because all we're talking about is the geography. So it's a little snapshot of what Mesopotamia was like. And we're going to continue to dig into how did they survive even though the rivers flooded all the time. And how were they able to do all these things like domesticate animals and really grow their civilization around this river that constantly flooded and all this land that was dry and would not allow crops to grow. So what I would like you to do for tonight, you have a quiz in your notes, okay, and it's in the workbook here, and it is also posted for you. And I want you to answer these 4 questions, circle them in your workbook, and also go on to Edmodo and put in your answers, please. If you have any questions, be sure to post them to on Edmodo so we can go over them in class tomorrow.